Welcome everyone to the Dean's Lecture Series. I'm delighted today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Felicia Mensah. I'm going to read her bio and then she'll have an hour to give her presentation and then do a Q&A. So Dr. Mensah is a professor of science education and vice chair of the Department of Mathematics, Science, and Technology, and a former associate dean at Teachers College, Columbia University. Not only does she enjoy teaching and research, she also has an exceptional record in advising graduate students and developing early scholars, with sponsoring nearly 50 doctoral dissertations and serving on more than 90 dissertation committees. Additionally, she works to mentor and support junior faculty in obtaining tenure and promotion and in improving classroom practice. As a prolific writer and a well-established researcher, her work addresses issues of diversity and equity in science teacher education, with culturally relevant teaching, multiculturalism, and critical theories guiding her teaching and research. Wow. Welcome, Dr. Mensah, and I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Dean Hamwork, and for all of those who are attending for this talk this afternoon, or it could be morning or later afternoon for some of you that are here with us. So I have a lot to share with you, so I'm not going to give a lot in terms of the intros, but thank you so much for those words. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start. So we are in an unprecedented time in our American history, from politics to health disparities to the economy, from educational inequities to voter suppression. The COVID-19 global pandemic has made even more visible, no longer hiding behind a dark curtain, the state of our government, economy, health, policing, and education. As we metaphorically associate 2020 with vision and clarity, the year 2020 has given us a clearer vision of the many issues that we must address as a nation and as a world. Not before and probably not ever again, the way we see and approach each of these interrelated issues and how the history books will choose to write, remember, and reflect on this time will be revealed in how we educate and learn from each other. Time now and in the future will tell us how we have placed and what we have placed in terms of our collective and individual values, import, and hope, with education being part of that. For me, these issues culminate into the purpose of education and my role as an educator. Teaching race and racism are important in teacher education and also my content area of science education. For example, as educational settings are experiencing increase in racial, ethnic, cultural, and gender diversity, as well as immigration status, linguistic, religious, and socioeconomic diversity, this also means that educators who serve students in our classrooms and university settings need to be culturally competent, racially literate, and responsive to all the needs of our students. Unfortunately, many K-12 teachers and university teacher educators have not been prepared for the diversity that we have in our K-12 and college classrooms. Before many of our teachers attend teacher education programs and complete their professional degrees, they have already experienced the impact of race and racism, or what Vinay Myers calls the smog of racism, whether consciously or unconsciously in their K-12 education, teacher education, and doctoral preparation. The context of increasing student diversity, changing school demographics, accountability and assessments, and persistent achievement and opportunity gaps have become areas of deep interest for research, practice, and policy in teacher education. Consequently, equity for all students has been crucial call for full engagement and learning for all students. How we achieve this is the challenge and one of the current issues in teacher education. From my work, and one of my most enduring questions is, how do I support teachers in meeting the aim of educational equity and racial justice within the context of teacher education for our children? So there is a need for change in teacher education. The data and the research tell us there are decreasing numbers of students across racial groups who do not desire to enter teaching as a profession. The pedagogy tells us that students in K-12 and university classrooms are bored, not challenged, and feel isolated from their teachers and peers in the content. The curriculum tells us it does not connect the historical legacy to the present, nor does it address contemporary issues that lay a foundation for the future. The children tell us Their classrooms are not welcoming, not intellectually rigorous, and for the majority of our students of color and our international students, the classroom can be a very traumatic space. Therefore, there is a need to dismantle and rebuild what we do in teacher education. My contribution and what I'm sharing with you in this talk this afternoon is about a course that I've created to address the research, the pedagogy, the curriculum, and the children in my attempt to address race, diversity, and preparing teachers for racial literacy in education. In other words, how do we dismantle and rebuild walls that really feature the diversity and the needs that we have for our students? So that was my introduction. So thank you all for that. I'm going to go directly into telling you about a course that I developed that features the things that I just spoke about in my introduction. So I'm going to go right into my study with a literature review. So Stillman and Anderson has stated that there are a few doctoral programs that really prepare our graduate students for the work they want to do in teacher education. And there's also an emergent body of literature that talks about teacher educator preparation. One study in particular by one of my former colleagues, Lynn Goodwin and others, investigated the views and perspectives of 293 mostly white teacher educators. They wanted to be able to understand the foundational knowledge that was needed to be a teacher educator. They will also want to evaluate the preparation that these teachers had gone through, and what can we learn as teacher educators in having to prepare them. But most of the participants in the study talked about having not feeling very well prepared to talk about issues of diversity, especially when they compared it to the experiences of some of their other teachers of color teacher educators. Also in the literature review, Sleater did a meta-analysis on the views of white pre-service teachers, looking at what kinds of ideas and what biases or assumptions that they may hold. And she found that there was a lack of recognition of the pervasiveness of racial inequity within teacher education. Many of the participants had deficit views and lower expectations about students of color. And this idea of a colorblind mentality in the way that they were able to approach teaching and denying the very significance of race in their practices. And also there was just general lack or a sense of themselves as being cultural beings. So this is really sets a foundation for the course that I'm creating and going to share with you. So just really trying to focus on what are these deficits? What do we need to do in teacher education to try to address some of these things that Sleater was able to find? Also within that, Peller, several years ago, announced that race consciousness has taken kind of this reappearance or this refinement of coming back, that we no longer can think of race discussions as taboo. And so we have to really figure out, how do we talk about this a lot more within the context of education? So we do have critical race scholars who have been talking about critical theories and critical race theory within teacher education, such as Gloria Lyson-Billings and Bill Tate. And so this is, again, one of the foundational pieces of my work. So as I look at my theoretical framework, looking at critical race theory as being a basic premise that race and racism are defining characteristics in American society. And I'm looking at this as a defining characteristic in also teacher education. I'm also informed by the work with Yolanda Sila-Ruiz's idea of racial literacy, where this is the ability to read, to discuss and write about situations that involve race and racism. And I'm coupling that with Haynes's notions of racial consciousness. So for me, this in-depth understanding of the racialized nature of teacher education, and how do we read and discuss and write about teacher education. And it requires a critical reflection of our assumptions, our privileges, and our biases about race and racism and privilege, and how it contributes to a teacher's worldview. So I'm situating this work around racial literacy, racial consciousness within the experiences of teacher education. So my research question for this study is, in what ways does a course on race and teacher education support the development of racial literacy of the graduate students who are interested in becoming teacher educators? So as I said, it's a course that I developed, Critical Voices in Teacher Education. We use very typically the things that most people do in their courses on large and small group interactive discussions. There are group assignments as an opportunity for the participants to actually lead and facilitate a class. For me, that's the development of their racial literacy. Course reading, so reports, published articles, papers, book chapters, and all those things you have in a course, as well as movie clips and video clips and images. So at the beginning of the class and also at the end of the class, we do writing reflections, a pre-thought writing reflection at the beginning of the class. And I use movie clips or images to spark some of that initial conversation. And then at the end of the class, there's also a question or image that students are shown. And then they're able to write and reflect about the content and the conversations for that particular class session. They also engage in small scale research projects or an issue that comes up in teacher education that they're curious about, or something that we've been talking about within the class. They was work in small groups to address that question by collecting a small scale, a bit of data and an analysis, and then presenting that data to the class. So here are just some examples that I want to share with you of what it looks like to have some of the pre-post writes or the videos. And some of these will come up in the responses of the students in the study. So the Black Doll, White Doll race experiment, we share that. I Speak Jive is a video clip from that movie Airplane. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Sidney Poitier. And what do you think we're gonna do or ask? And it's a clip of Tupac Shakur talking about his experiences. But then here on the right side, there's some images that we've used in the class for pre and post thoughts. And again, some of these are gonna come up as I share with you some of the data. So the method, this is the, for this particular course, there are only 8 students, and this was actually the second time I taught this course. So it was in the very formative years of trying to learn about this course and what students were gaining from it. But I had 5 second and third year doctoral students who were in science education and social studies education, as well as 3 master's level students in science ed and curriculum and teaching. And then this total of 8, there were 4 females and 4 males. But out of this, there were 4 international students, 2 African-American students, and 2 white students. So the data collection were the pre and post write entries that they did. So the pre-thoughts and the post-thought. The final thoughts paper was an opportunity for them to go back and read everything. It was collected as a journal, but go back and read all of their posts that they had in class and write a final paper. And then there was a course evaluation. So these were questions that I posed to them about their learning, about teacher education, coursework, and things of that sort. So everything was collected from all the participants, gathered into one Word document. So for me to read, to reread, and make memos in the process of data analysis. So I use constructivist grounded theory methods by Shamaz. So just kind of this emergent design of looking and staying very close to the data, looking at various things that came out specifically around race, racism, multiculturalism, looking at ideas of conceptions of self or identity. So all of these, so going through the process of data analysis was very enlightening to me from teaching this class, but I'm also going to share with you, hopefully through the Q&A, if you have questions about the course specifically, and then I'm going to share a little bit about where I am now from having developed this course a few years ago. So there are 4 themes I'm going to share with you for this afternoon's presentation. Theme 1, unspoken racism. Theme 2, racial consciousness. Theme 3, critical mind work. And then theme 4, what teacher education needs regarding race. So I'm going to go through each one of these, and I'm actually going to share the voices from the students from their writings and how they thought about this idea of being in a course that's specifically grounded ideas of race and racism. So theme number 1, unspoken. So unspoken racism. So one of the participants said, for me, race and racism is the prevalent unspoken topic in teacher education today. It is an issue present in every classroom in New York City, across the US, and the majority of the world. Yet the recent push for educational reform failed to mention this issue in any way, shape, or form. I also am aware that despite taking a multicultural education class here at the college, I was very much underprepared for the realities of a New York City's classroom with respect to issues of race and racism. So I'm going to also give you another one. So this is from Teresa. I do not feel that conversations about racism are happening, especially in private independent schools in New York City. I absolutely feel that teachers need to be educated around issues of race and racism and be equipped with the tools to address issues around both inside and outside their classrooms. So from these 2 examples, we see the unspoken ideas around racism. Paul was currently a teacher in the classroom as well as Teresa. And so we see that both of them not only just generally in their teacher education courses or their preparation themselves, but just currently in their own schools that racism was unspoken. So then we have Tricia. Especially this course provides a forum for pre-service and in-service teachers to express their opinions on certain significant aspects of urban schooling that are ignored by administrators, but affect students' growth both emotionally and academically. So here Tricia is talking about, again, not being spoken about in her school, nor her administrators offering opportunities for teachers to talk about it, but she sees how vitally important it is to talk about racism. So the second theme is racial consciousness. Again, I'm going to give you some voices from the participants. So here Tricia says, the videos and discussions also increased my awareness of racism against me personally. I never really thought about others being racist towards me, but thinking deeply about certain situations has made me realize that subtle events have occurred in the past that would be considered racist. So not only Tricia, but some of the other participants in the study had to go back and think about their personal experiences and what was going on in their own lives, and to be able to see, again, this idea of being able to write and to read and discuss racism. So she thought about its episodes in her teacher education program that she just kind of brushed to the side and never really thought, that was probably a racist thing that my teacher said to me, or this was probably a racist thing that happened in my in a course that she had taken. So she was starting to come to realize that this is something that she needed to think a little bit more deeply about, the things that were happening in her own life. And here of Letha, she says, I have also come to understand that my development of my social cultural awareness has been facilitated by my reading and reflections, as well as being given the space in class to work through verbalizing my own social cultural awareness. So again, this is an example of Letha, again, that's coming to this awareness of what her life's experiences have been and have been impacted by race and racism. And here Robert says, I think the incorporation of race certainly widened my research interest. Furthermore, I never really knew how strongly race played a role in science education. Although this is not my initial field, I was very interested to see how educators and students conceptualize science class, relying on dated stereotypes that are perpetuated by current institutions and required curricula. So I mentioned about the participants that came across different content areas, which is one of the reasons I like teaching this class. It's open to students across the campus. But Robert was able to get a bit more of an understanding around how race impacts the subject areas. With him being in social studies, and then there are science education students in the class, he was able to kind of understand a little bit more around the stereotypes and the biases that come about being in the field of science. But he also said he was able to certainly think about how his ideas and the things that we talked about in class widen his research interest. And then, so as I said before, this is one of the I know grounding activities that we do in the class is actually showing the black white doll. So this is the classic experiment from Dr. Clark, was showing children, black children, a white doll or white doll, and for them to be able to select, who do they think is good or who do they think is bad. But for Letha, it was an idea of raising her racial consciousness, but it was also very emotional for her. So she says, this video evokes very strong reflection and responses for me. I am disgusted. I was always praised for my white features as being the ones that are beautiful, my long hair and hazel eyes. These features often separated me from from other African American counterparts. I was teased as a young girl by most of my peers, and I ignored my identity as a Black woman. I was able to get by most of my life colorblind. So colorblindness was really a concept that we talked about often in the class that came up. It's often one of the concepts that's spoken about in critical race theory too. But being able to watch the video and see young people, in some ways struggle with this idea of their own identities really brought up some um, um, emotions and feelings actually for Aletha, actually for some of the other students that went through the class. So this is another one of our one of the images that we showed in the class, and this was actually the image that was shown at the end of class for the doll experiment. And so we've seen this image before with the equality and equity, and some of them have even additional boxes at the end that talks about liberation. But I wanted them to really think about, how do we, as a teacher in your particular practice, how are you treating your students? Do you treat them equally? And so that was the prompt of the question. But what can you say to help teachers understand what this statement means as a stereotype and what it means in the context of teaching and learning? So one of the things in the course, because I had some students that were teachers currently, and I wanted them to be able to make the transition between the things that we would talk about in class and also what was actually happening in their own classes. So hence this was the question, say, what would you say to other teachers probably in your classroom around these ideas of equality and equity? And so here we have a comment from Teresa. She says, it was nice to hear about some of the personal experiences of our colleagues in the class. And she was actually talking specifically about the Black doll experiment and for the students expressing their feelings about that. But then she also said, I had a personal breakthrough as an educator today in thinking about color blindness and fairness. Fairness does not equate to teaching all our students the same way. Each of our students need different things from us based on a number of things. It is important that we as teachers do not overlook the power that we have to connect to our students on a social, emotional level in order to bring out the best in our students and to help them to reach their potential. So here I think, when Teresa said she had this breakthrough, this is fairly early in the semester. So I like this idea of this breakthrough for her to start to really question and challenge her role in the classroom and the relationships they had with her students. And I'm thinking it's because students in the class also starting to share more personal experiences that they had, and it was starting to really open up the class for us to share across our experiences. So theme 3 talks about the critical mind work. So as we were sharing our different experiences in the classroom and open up to everyone, there was still this, people say that inner work that you have to do. There was quite a bit of inner work that all the participants had to do. And so I'm calling this one the critical mind work that comes about when we're engaged in the conversations that we were in the class. So this is Gita, and she says, a challenge, perhaps even a struggle as I continuously try to find my voice, my identity within the different courses, how I present myself, how I want to be perceived. Some classes I feel silenced by the dominant discourse, one that is alien to my experiences and understandings as an international student. Others are empowering, enabling me to tap into my experiences and prior knowledge. It's a struggle. So here Gita was really struggling. She says it was a challenge for her to think about her experiences and what she was going through, being in classes where she didn't often have a chance to talk and to vocalize her experiences, but now being in a class where she, it was an expectation for me for them to do that. But I think by having them to write the journal prompts and having them to keep journals of their own thinking, they were able to express things they may not have been able to express out loud in class, and still trying to go, do that inner work of trying to understand their particular experiences. And again, for Gita, she said, it's a struggle. Here we have Aletha again. She says, after today, I realize how important it is to do rather than to say. How important it is to present pre-service teachers with restructuring experiences and to introduce the repertoires of diversity rather than to tell them your viewpoint. Many of my colleagues in the class restructured their viewpoints on the importance of diversity in teacher preparation as a result of reading the Milner article, so that article served as a vehicle for restructuring their mindsets. And here again, this idea of restructuring Aletha is talking about is again how the class was trying to make sense of the readings, how they were trying to make sense of each other's experiences. And so the Milner article is an article that he talks about the repertoires of education, where he talks about color blindness, meritocracy, some of these other ideas around critical race theory. So they were getting these ideas and these different concepts and trying to understand what they meant in the context of their experiences and also in the context of teacher education. So for her, she said that was this kind of like restructuring that we were all trying to come to some meaning making together as a class. And then also the critical mind work having to do again with these different readings and the pre and post right statements. And so Tricia says, I realize that this course has helped me to evolve my way of thinking about diversity in the classroom and about the many deficiencies that teacher preparation programs are plagued with. Tricia was one that often talked about, the differences the differences in her teacher preparation program and what she was enduring now as she was actually one of the doctoral students. And she says, with our roundtable discussions surrounding issues that teachers face in the classroom today, the class allowed me to reevaluate some of my own opinions about my students and about my many cultural background and and about the many cultural backgrounds they come from. Again, the context of not only helping them to think about their experiences as teachers and teacher educators, they had to really think about the experiences of their students in the classroom. As I said before, it's like it was really good that they were all they would teach it and they can play around with some of the ideas that we had in class that also really affected kind of like in the moment their relationships with their students in their own classrooms. And then here, Paul says, I feel that in this course, I was challenged to look at myself and identity, what it is that allows me success in life. This was hard and uncomfortable to do, but I feel this was necessary in order to expose the critical differences and opportunity and equality of access to white individuals and everyone else. I also feel that having had these uncomfortable experiences, I would not be afraid to re-engage in this kind of exploration in the future. This is something that I believe needs to occur again. And I feel that each time I engage in this kind of critical inner dialogue, I will grow as an educator. More than this, I think I would be confident. More than this, I think I would be confident enough to lead others to this place of their reflection. Okay, so basically what Paul is saying is that for him to, it was very much a challenge for him to think about his own identity, for him to think about, the role of the white male in education, a lot of things that he was going through as well, exposing his ideas and that inner dialogue that he had. But what I really like about what Paul says in this particular reflection is that he felt like, if I had to engage in this again, it would be really hard to do it, but he would do it. And he thought that, he would feel much more confident in being able to lead discussions and even find some kind of a place to reflect about his experiences. And to me, this really is what what I want to have the participants to get, or the students to get out of the class, is that those ideas of racial literacy and racial consciousness, that they can talk and read and discuss these ideas around race and racism. And then finally, for theme number 4, I was really concerned about, having created this course and taught this course. Now, I really wanted to have foundations about what can we learn and share in teacher education. So what do we need to, learn from the participants, and, what did I need to learn as an instructor for teaching this particular class, regarding issues of race within teacher education. So this is the last finding that I'm going to share with you. So this is Teresa. And so she says around, like, the first step for me in thinking about what teachers need from teacher education programs around the theme of race and racism was to reflect on my own practice as an educator. So again, it's like we have to allow students time to reflect on their practice. So she says, before taking this course, I'm not sure I ever gave much thought to what it means for a teacher to be colorblind and how that might affect a student of color. Honestly, I have always thought of myself as a teacher who provides a safe and challenging learning environment for all of my students, regardless of their race. The discussion of colorblindness has led me to question whether or not I am colorblind if I don't know the different races in my classroom. Am I making my students feel bad and not knowing it? Do my students of color need more from me or something different from me? How can I tell? How can I find out? I fear that there is something I am doing to make some of my students feel bad and not realizing it. So again, this is just another really deep reflection coming from Teresa. She's really questioning her practice, and really interrogating what it is that she's doing in the classroom that's going to affect her students. And so here she's, asking these very thought-provoking questions, towards at the end of the semesters on her final course evaluation. But I'm hoping these questions have really propelled her to think about what her practice looks like. And so the discussions around color blindness, around the role of the teacher in the classroom, all these are starting to come out for Teresa at the end, as she writes in her final reflections. And then racism is a harsh reality, says Nahum. Many do not admit it, many tend not to. But to those who are affected by it, it certainly is true. There may even be institutions which create circumstances which endorses it. If teachers are made aware of it, then presumably they would do a better job in teaching classes in such a way which would work toward eradicating such problems. So for Naum, he was really saying like we have to be able to engage in these kinds of conversations or these courses to be able to do that, and being able to help teachers to be aware of that. And if teachers are being aware of that, we hope that it will change their particular practice. And then, as he said, start moving towards eradicating the problems that we have in our classrooms. So, and then I have a couple more responses. And so this is from Paul on his postdoc towards the end of the course. He says, it is striking me how significant the school and teacher are in facilitating the opportunity or continuation of the norms of the power structure. Teacher education programs will not provide instant solutions, but can provide new teachers with essential tools to approach, engage their students. And so this idea of tools became kind of like something that for me to think about a little bit more too, like what particular tools should we be using in teacher education to help students to address and to develop their racial literacy in teacher education. So tools came up again also for Teresa. She says, I do think though, that teacher education programs need to tap into and provide the tools for all future teachers' abilities to be educated on the issues, to self-reflect, and to be open to the needs of all of our students. So again, this idea around tools, and maybe that's something we can talk about in the Q&A, like what would be these essential tools? What are these tools for being able to engage in teacher education to talk about race? So for my discussion and implication point, so there are the four themes: unspoken racism, racial consciousness, and critical mind work teacher education needs. So one of the first things that comes out is that there has to be attention to race as an ongoing conversation in teacher education, and particularly in dealing with current racial, economic, educational, and health inequities. Secondly, the participants develop an awareness of the impact of race and racism in their lives. It was the content, the interactions and discussions in the class, I believe, had assisted them in gaining greater understanding of how to connect their issues of race to larger issues in teacher education, society, and even related to issues of themselves and their own identities. Third, the participants spoke about the challenge, the struggle, how uncomfortable they were to be able to take up and engage in these conversations, but they also felt that it was needed and necessary. And then fourth, the participants see the necessity of centering race in teacher education and to have the tools for reflection and engagement for themselves and also for their students. So as I go back and think about the theoretical framework that I have for this study and how it also is grounded in the work that I'm doing in this particular course, and like a lot of the work that I'm actually doing really. So keeping with critical race theory's view that racism is an inherent and normalized aspect of American society, it is also an inherent and, aspect of teacher education. So being able to think about the teaching and teacher education courses to center race is very necessary. So I don't think that what I produce in terms of this course creation was something as a unique, truly unique. But I think what really made it unique for me is the way that I was able to assist students and come into some racial literacy and racial consciousness, and for the course that was really focused on future teacher educators. The idea of being able to produce a course and to be able to think about future teacher educators for me is that there's a purposely designed curriculum, to begin with racial literacy and racial consciousness and teacher development, being consistent and varied engagement. So that being the pre and post thought writes, the movie clips, the readings that we had in class, for students to really reflect on race and racism in the past, the present, and the future. There was community with honest dialogue. And I like the idea of how Melody Hobson talks about color braid spaces. So, opening up the context of the course for students to really reflect about their experiences and talk about them in a supportive environment and to learn from each other's experiences. And then I do look at the role, that I played in the class, not my positionalities as an African-American woman, sharing my counter stories at moments where I thought was really important to be able to expand and to be part of the classroom as well, to talk about what was happening with me as a science educator or a Black woman educator, or even a faculty member of color. So being able to talk about that with the students in the class. So my next steps, so critical voices class, I'm still teaching the course, I'm still learning from the course and the students who are taking it, but I'm really focusing on the preparation of teacher educators of color. this is coming out for me even more so as one of the issues that we should be able to talk about in teacher education, but looking at their experiences in teacher education. But I also want to know, what about their experiences taking the critical voices class, as many of them talk about this being a course where this is the first time they've really been engaged in conversations like this. Developing more experiences and opportunities through the curriculum and the resources, and this is a challenge for me as well. It's like, what additional things can I bring to the class for us to have conversations about, and to really develop our racial literacy and our racial consciousness, and in attending to the needs and desire of teachers and doctoral students. So the course now actually is more focused on doctoral students taking the class and preparing them as future teacher educators. But I have students who are actually adjuncts when they take the class. Not a lot, but some come into the class and they are currently adjuncts, and being able to actually talk with them about their experiences and model for them the things that I'm doing in the course, that they actually go back and do in their courses as well. So this idea of looking at development of racially literate and racial conscious educators through professional development that happens through the course, through my mentorship of other students that are also currently teaching, and then just supporting their overall teaching practice. So I want to end with this quote from Bell Hooks, is one of my mentors in reading, so to speak. But she says, and I'm interjecting here in teacher education, that the teacher education classroom, with all of its limitations, remains a location of possibility. In that field of possibility, we have the opportunity to labor for freedom, to demand ourselves and comrades an openness of mind and heart that allows us to face reality, even as we collectively imagine ways to move beyond boundaries, to transgress. This is education as the practice of freedom. So thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was, I'm a science educator, so I learned a lot in your presentation. So thank you so much. We'll open it up for questions. Can I ask just one question? It's a real quick question. Was this an elective course, or was it a course that everybody had to take?
So it's an elective course, but we're actually working with the programming, curriculum, and teaching to make it one of the core courses of this program that we've done, called a certificate. What is not the certificate? It's the doctorate in teacher education. So it was an elective class, which we call them a selective, but now they're thinking of making this one of their core classes, which I'm very excited about. So yeah, it was a elective.
What's the percentage of students that would elect to take this selective course?
So, well, yeah, on average, we have about 12 to 16 students to take the class. This is a graduate level, doctoral level course. As I presented the data here, this was the second iteration of the course. But every semester, the class numbers have grown. And then but I've asked students in the past, like, well, what do you think is a good number of students to be in the class? Because of the conversations that are happening, the kind of like intimacy of the class. And for the past 2 years, students have said, well, we don't think the class should be any more than 12, 14 students at the most. But the most I've had in the class, I think, has been 17 or 18, but I'm trying to keep it around 15 to 16.
And my next question, then I'll stop and let everybody else ask questions. Do you have plans to follow them in their career to see if this course made an impact in their practice?
Yes, so I do have data from students that are currently teacher educators. I have not interviewed them about, the impact of the course and what they're doing in their particular practice, but I do get conversations with them. Some of them I am in contact with, but mainly the ones that are in science education. So I do see them, and actually can ask. So yes, that is one of the next kind of like areas I am very much interested in, and seeing how that kind of like follows through in their development as teacher educators.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it for other people now. Thank you. Does anyone have a question? I'll ask another one. You talked about, we said we could discuss the tools. So what were you talking about as far as tools?
Right. I mean, that was actually one that I wanted to throw at that, throw
Oh,
at the
okay.
participants as well. Like, what do you think are tools that could be very helpful in trying to engage in particular conversations around race and racism in teacher education?
Hmm.
Dr. Mensah, I had, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was absolutely fabulous.
Thank
And
you.
I had a question for you just in terms of how you think about where your course sits within the broader curriculum, and if there are conversations across the in terms of foundations of education, or how you're thinking about that as it relates to other courses.
Right. So I think, so Deanna, you're asking in terms of the course that's situated within TC, like where I'm teaching it. So yeah, that was, let me give a little bit of history. So I was on this committee on campus called the Teacher Education Policy Committee, and I've been on that committee for a number of years. And one of the things that people were talking about was like, how do we think about teacher education a little bit differently? What do we need to do to kind of think about that? And now, not to shame or put shade on my colleagues, but you all know we go to meetings, there's often a lot of conversation, that we're always talking, we come up with really great ideas, but there was actually no forward movement. And so in my mind, I was like, well, to me, it seemed very obvious actually to develop a course. And so I took it upon myself. I said, you know what, let me develop this course. There's some things that I wanted to do and want to address. And also I wanted it to be outside of science education in some ways, because I teach a lot of students in science ed. But there are not that many Black students or students of color in science ed. So I was like, well, how can I develop a course that would give me a little bit more of a broadness of reach of students across the campus? And because I was collaborating and working with a lot of my colleagues in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching, I thought, like, you know what, I think we need a course like this. And so I developed the course like this. And I think it does fit, within the, foundations, of a course or whatever. But our students are coming in with some foundations already, because it's a graduate school of education. But what we found, and what I've been able to find in this particular class as well, is that they may have taken, like one of my participants said, like, I took a multicultural course, but we didn't talk about this. And I was hearing a lot of that in the conversations of some of the students. And so I was like, you know what? I think this is like a really relevant class for students across the entire campus. And so it was really by word of mouth that students like, oh yeah, take this class or take this class, because we were talking about issues of race and racism, privilege, introducing theoretical frameworks around critical race theory, all these different things. But in my mind as an educator, I really thought, like, I really want to focus in on the teacher educator and really the future teacher educator, because we have a number of classes, that are focused on our master's level students who get certified to go into classrooms. But I kept thinking about, well, what happens when they come off to college and have to take classes? Who are the faculty that are going to be teaching them around these issues? And I've always been really interested in looking at professional development of teachers. And so to me, the course made sense in that way to say, you know what, I really want to focus this on my doctoral students and doctoral students across the campus to learn about this, because they will one day step into these roles as teacher educators. So that was kind of like where I was framing it. And again, I'm really glad that Curriculum and Teaching is seeing the worth and value of the class to want to make it a core class within their department. So I'm in science education, mathematics, science, and teacher education. And they want this to be a core class in Curriculum and Teaching. Yeah.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
If you had to think of 3 to 5 things that students leave this course understanding, what do you think they would be?
Oh my. Really an understanding of how prevalent racism is. And I see that across the content areas, and especially for those who are in the area of science education. They just never really thought about, how race is impacting, the number of students that go into the sciences, the way that we look at science, and they just never thought about it like that. And which is, I never really thought about it either in my development as a science person or science educator. I came into education from industry, so we didn't talk about this at the large corporation that I worked at either. And so, and then just coming into education for them to think about it in that particular way. So to me, I think that's really what the value of racial literacy does, is it tells you, like, how do we discuss this? How do we read about this and put on a racial lens? And so I think that's one of the things that comes out. The other one, which is comments that I get from students that have taken a class in the past, is this idea around their own identities. Like really thinking about and reflecting about their race, their class, their gender, where they grew up, and just really trying to think about what kind of person they are and what kind of person they would like to be. So we get lots of conversations with them thinking about how, you all saw some of the comments, which are being typical across the years, about how comfortable it is, but they know they need to do this, how it reveals certain things about their biases and assumptions that they did not know that they had. And then I think the third one is like the connection between their ideas around identity and what happens in the classroom. So again, as I've been saying, it's like, I really love that I have classroom teachers that are taking the class, and also, a few adjuncts across the years that have taken the class, where they are actually able to implement things, as I said, in the moment. So the conversation and the things that we're doing in the class, they go back and say, or whatever, send me a note and say, Dr. Mensah, I shared the same reading in my class, or I was able to bring up this particular question in the class because we talked about it last week. There's one student actually in my class, like I have class later tonight, and one student, weekly, we talk about things that she gets in one week with me, and she implements it like the next Tuesday or in her class, or next Wednesday in her class. And I love that, because I feel like that's that mentoring that's also missing in teacher education, that we don't really share our practice. We don't really share the struggles that we're going through. So those would probably that might be 3 or 4 things, Dean Hamburg, that I said, but those are kind of like the major things that I'm seeing that are coming out that are really also allowing me to learn more deeply about these ideas. I let them know, it's like, I don't know everything. I'm still learning as well. Oh, another one is like the idea that they become facilitators of a class session. I offer to them the pre-writes, the images or the videos and the readings, but they have to get together as a class and then decide how they want to present that to us. So it's helping them to develop their practice as educators, which they don't get very many opportunities to do that, because we're a graduate school of education, so we don't really have many opportunities for our doctoral students to teach. So those will be the highlights, I think, that are coming out, that I'm really, really excited about the course, and kind of like the new directions of where it could potentially go with additional students that are coming in.
Well, thank you. That was my question earlier. I was really looking at, does this awareness lead to impact? That's like that, following them out in their career. And if it makes an impact, this awareness that comes from this course, right?
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
I do see that mostly with those that are adjuncted, because right there in the moment for that. But I definitely can go back and look over, because I've collected data from past students of the class. But that one question I have not really asked them about, have you taken things from critical voices and implemented in your current practice, and what does that look like? So that would be a great research question.
Yeah, it would. I think that it would be a logical next step for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Mensah. That was really interesting. And this is a field I don't know anything about, so my question may be too simple. But is this type, for science educators or science teachers, talking about critical race or race, is this part of something that is kind of emerging, or that there is more dialogue about? Because you mentioned that like across the university you had these conversations, but I think it seems so critical what you said about like how in science maybe people take kind of race like that's not a part of the dialogue, or kind of being part of the dialogue. Is this something that you're kind of pioneering, and something that's changing, that you're kind of leading?
Yes, Peggy, thank you. I mean, I think it is something that more science educators are interested in doing that. I did see Chris, I thought, yeah, Christopher is here. Chris can probably answer too. So there are colleagues of ours that are in science education that are tending to issues of race, equity, diversity, and some are starting to really integrate ideas of critical race theory, into the practice of looking at science education. So that is really exciting work that's happening, and that is emerging. But what I think is not really happening is this idea of proposing how do we develop future teacher educators or future teacher science educators that would talk about this. Because again, many of them don't see not only around race or racism, but many social cultural themes. They don't really see like, why do we even need to talk about students and identity or, you know, in a science classroom? How is that even relevant? And so again, that's where a lot of the work has to happen, is I know just indeed these ideas are truly relevant in the connection between the students, the content, and the teachers. And so, yeah, you know, our field has some pioneers maybe that, you know, that are doing some of that work, but it is something that as a field that we're continually trying to do more of. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Other questions? You can either put it in the chat or ask it out loud.
You talked about tools. I'm curious if you use, are there specific protocols or things that you use in the course in order to facilitate the dialogue?
Yeah. So particularly is around the video clips and the images that I use. I did share some of those on the slide with you. I think it surprises them. And again, this is one of the ways I want them to develop their racial literacy and racial consciousness, is that by showing them things that they don't think that race is there. And so it really does, you know, I guess for them, like, I didn't really think that that had anything to do with it. But it's like, I want you to see that everything has everything to do with it in many ways. And so showing like really old clips, you know, that many of them have never seen before. There was also a clip that I show with the Wizard of Oz. It was actually Michael Jackson and Diana Ross. And Steve's like, I didn't even know there was another Wiz, like another version of the Wizard of Oz. And so these ideas around, like, you know, how we always center whiteness in our practice, like, no, there are other people that have, you know, there's another version of this. And so just kind of like getting them to see the expanse and diversity of resources that are available to engage in these kinds of conversations. They're actually very surprised by that. There's a clip that I show that's actually it's very old as well. It's actually two Latinx men that are walking in New York City, and they're talking in Spanish. They're actually from Cuba, and so the student like, what, you know, even though it has the words at the bottom that they can read, but it's like, what are they talking about? And so even try to think about, like, you know, many things come out of that particular clip, even around like, well, what are they talking about? How well do they even know the US and they're coming from Cuba for the first time? Like, you know, again, this idea of how we center whiteness and that people from around the world know the context of America, even though they've never been here before. Or even just to say, like, I've had Latino students that say, like, I've never even had a movie clip that was in my language in my teacher education course before. So, I mean, so it's just all these different ways and opportunities, these different tools that are available to us to get us engaged or to start the conversation around race. That I think, you know, that to me, that's the fun part of curriculum development, and being able to do that, but then to be able to say, like, my voice is important, that the curriculum does address me and my identity. So I get many of my students, you know, that talk about how, you know, they have so much more opportunities to talk and to engage because the curriculum does really resonate with them. Yeah.
Thank you.
You also brought up reflection quite a bit. And so I wonder if this also gives them the space to kind of think about it, because I think, and this is, again, I don't know anything about science education, but potentially thinking that this is what it's taught, but like giving them the space to kind of look at these other resources and other ways of kind of presenting it and thinking about it. Because the other thing you also brought out was that it's better not to bring your own perspective to it, but to kind of lead your students, like, so that these teacher educators can lead their students. And so it gives them that space to kind of create that curriculum piece versus telling somebody, like, this is how you should feel.
Right. So yes, the reflection part is truly important. I think it's one of the foundations of the course, with the pre-writes in the very beginning. So it's like, as they come to class, that's the first thing we do, is to show a clip or image, and they write about it. So I want their ideas to come out first. They can also write if the image resonates with them from the course readings of that week. So that's another way that they're able to kind of like embed the readings through this clip. And they don't see the clip. The first time they see the clip is when they come to class. And then we're going through the class, you know, doing whatever you do as an instructor in the class, but still open up that space for engagement and for the conversations and things of that sort. You know, people do reveal who they are. And so, you know, and given, you know, just letting them know how much I appreciate them being vulnerable and opening themselves up. And as I said, I mean, there are things I share with them about my experience. And so it really is this really learning, collaborative, engaged space that I try to create every semester. And students talk about that in the final reflections about that's how, how it comes out. And then at the end of class, like we've had all this conversation at the end of class. Now I want you to reflect again about what you got out of this. So then the other part that becomes important is like, because I'm the only one that reads their journals, then I'm also having a conversation with them in the writings post class, throughout the entire semester. So those are ideas that I can have a conversation with them, with me. There may be moments where I say, what, this is really great. Could you share this in class? I really make it open for them to come to the class however they would like to come to the class, but just really encouraging to talk and to get those ideas and those reflections out. And then at the end of the semester, it's like they have this journal where they have their readings, the pre-post writes, they have the comments from me. This is like the educator part of me as a researcher. Go back and reread everything. What themes show up out of your journal? What ideas did you learn for yourself? And so then they're able to go back and like see the growth over time. And to me, that's purpose, because I don't want them to come into the class the same way and leave the class the same way. Like there has to be some movement. I don't care if the movement is this far or this far. There has to be some movement. And the only way they can do that is through their reflective practice and being able to look at their reflections over time. So yes, it's grounded in reflection. It's grounded in this idea of that critical inner work that I was talking about, that they have to do when they struggle. They feel like they're not doing it right. Like there's no right or wrong. I want you to just like, right. and as an instructor to think about them in preparation as doctoral students, you have to write, that little bit of analysis that you're doing when you rewrite and write your final reflection paper, that's an analysis that you're doing about your own thinking. So definitely, Peggy, reflection is key to the course.
Can I ask a question? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Are there plans to run a course like this in the leadership development programs, right? So that, you have the future science and teacher educators and working kind of in parallel with the future principal and superintendent educators so that they can facilitate this work jointly.
That sounds great, Kathleen. No, I haven't had conversations with my colleagues in organizational leadership or administration around any of that. But yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
There's a need. There's a I work in leadership, so there's a definite need for it. So thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful.
As I think about the students over time, I've had at least, I would say I have probably at least 3 people that were in administrative roles when they took the course that I can just remember like recently. I actually currently have one now that's in administration, but it's not that department or our program and this one now she's actually in science ed. I've had others. I actually had a music educator who was also the department chair of his program. So yes, in some ways, but I haven't specifically like thought about them as a question. That's good. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question. Hi, Felicia. My name is Aurelius. So I missed your talk, but I was teaching a PhD course when they got us a little bit early. So I'm here to catch the back end of these questions.
Good.
So my question is mostly because of your background. The question is mostly not per se from your talk. How do you build support for inclusive decision making? Because that's often something that's, people people focus on diversity and they focus on equity, but they forget inclusion and belongingness. And how do you design that in your curriculum, especially around STEM?
Yeah. I really think this is the part where the positionality plays a really big role. Being an African-American female scientist or faculty member, it brings students to another version of what inclusion could look like. I've had students in the past, actually even in my elementary methods course that I teach, that I'm the first Black faculty member they've ever had. For some of my science educators, I am the first Black faculty science educator they've ever had, scientist they've ever seen. So for me, the ideas around inclusion is for us to make ourselves available to share and to talk and to help and to mentor them. And so I think for the class, you know, people are, you know, pretty much, let's see, what is it like, self-selected into the course. And so they probably already have a certain interest in wanting to do this. And so that inclusion part for them is already there. They want to be able to learn about this, but I'm going to find it being interesting when it's a course where they say it's your core and you have to take it. I'm not really sure what's going to happen at that particular level, but I'm hoping that they will find that this is something that they needed to take, that they were actually glad that they took the class. So I don't know, then, you know, maybe that will be another question in another year or two after I see what happens around that. But, you know, these ideas around inclusion is that, you know, you come as you are and you're part of the class, and we want to hear from your voice, you know, hear from your particular experiences, your perspectives. And so I do work hard at trying to provide that for the students in the class.
Thank you. I see that we're at our time, but Chris, did you have a quick question?
If possible, just one.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, since I called you out, Chris.
Hi, Felicia, and thank you.
Yes.
So as researchers, I know that we often learn from our mistakes and sometimes not our successes. So in the process of building this actual course, were there things that that you found out that you should just never do again, or things that you were tried out during your class, and has it made you go back to rethink some of your approaches as you're engaging students in this work? So just that redesign part of your cycle that you've gone through, what might have been some of those things?
Yeah. Now, like for like 3 years, I would say that I've taught the class, students were saying like, we want to hear more from you. And so that is a challenge for me because I really want them, I don't want them to think that I'm the expert in the classroom, that I'm taking over the class, because it is a collective class. Like I said, I work hard for to be part, like everybody to be part of the class. So what I've been trying to learn from this is to be okay with that in some ways. Be okay in the sense that I do tell them I'm also learning. I'm learning from you. And if I sit in the role as a teacher or if I sit in the role as a learner, then I can't always have the kind of like the powerful position in the classroom. So I'm learning about, really what does it mean to yield the space for the students to be able to develop their voices and not to say things when I think, sometimes people say, the teachable moments. I mean, there are times I like, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to say anything because I want them to really like go through it and see what happens on the other end. But but I'm taking notes all the time. And so I come back to moments where, they may not have gotten a particular kind of idea that I want them to get, or I really want them to think even more deeply about a particular kind of an issue. And then I may not, I may wait on it, but I'm trying to really like yield the space to give people time, to give them time to really think and to reflect, and then kind of like step into the moment. Or so then what I find is happening is that other students, because of their different levels on the continuum, then they're stepping in and saying things back to students that may not have been like the thing that they should have said. So that's what I'm really learning, like really the facilitation of this kind of a course. And again, I think it's going to be different when I might maybe have students who are not like really wanting to be there. I've actually enjoyed the class with those who have actually self-selected into the course to really learn about more. We've had tense moments in class before, and we're really trying to handle it as an instructor and with the students coming back on the opposite end of it. So I mean, there are lots of things to be able to learn of teaching a course of this sort in teacher education, also with the different content areas, music, social studies, English, science, across. How do they learn from each other? What are the things that are common across the experiences of content, but also experiences around being educators and researchers? So yeah, every day, like I have 2 students that meet with me after class, every class session to debrief. So that I'm learning and they're learning. So like, what do you all notice? What did you notice? So it's like I'm always in this space of talking and mentoring the students around some of these ideas and practices. And even the newest thing that I did for this semester was the students, when they were doing their facilitations, then I meet with them a week later to talk about how did it go for them. Because that was one of the things students were saying, like, they wanted more mentorship, not so much in terms of the course itself, but like if they're teaching or presenting in other classes, nobody ever gives them feedback. So they never really know how to improve that practice. So that was one of the things I did implement this semester from feedback from last year. But yeah, thank you, Chris, for that, because it's always a moment for me of learning and reflection. Like I pretty much practice what I preach.
Well,
If
thank
I'm
you.
having the students to do it, I got to do it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everybody in the room has learned a lot. And from one fellow science educator to another, thank you for what you're doing. I'm going to incorporate some of that into my courses when I'm teaching. And thank you for taking an hour out of your day to present to us and answer our questions. And I wish you the best. And one day I hope to meet you in person.
Yes, and thank you all as well for your engagement, your questions. Thank you, Dean Hamrick, for the invitation. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.